Welcome, everyone, to our first mock assessment for 2025, our CMMC in Action series. I am the facilitator, president, and founder of Aspire Cyber. Started this series to really give people opportunities to illustrate how to complete the requirements. There's a lot of reviewing what the requirements are, but I think the best way is let's talk more action. Let's demonstrate how it's done. I'm really excited. We have 6 players join us today. They're going to role play. They're going to demonstrate how a organization seeking assessment, so the defense contractor can complete this self-assessment, implement the requirements. Disclaimer, this is just for training purposes. It's a mock assessment. So I am a lead CMMC certified assessor. This is not consulting advice. We're just giving you examples, and it's for informational purposes only. So I'm not taking any liability. Aspire Cyber. If you do this on your own, don't get it right, and yeah, that's all for informational purposes. Lawyers make us say that. A little bit about Aspire Cyber. We are specialized in CMMC readiness, focused on supporting those defense contractors, whether completing their CMMC Level 1 self-assessment, or most of our engagements helping those defense contractors and subcontractors prepare for their Level 2 certification assessments. Aspire Cyber, we've been in business over 3 years now. My wife and I started it. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. There's a lot of growth over the last couple of years, but I've been in cybersecurity a little over 22 years now. Long before cybersecurity became sexy, I was doing cybersecurity in the Army. It wasn't called that back then. You can relate, Cody, where it had been in the Marines. It's a different name, but yeah.
Yes.
Been at it for a while. All right. So some of the assessment tools and resources that we're going to be using for this mock assessment today. Aspire Cyber developed a tool called CMMC Proof, which is our compliance acceleration system. And it's used to help an organization perform their gap assessment, track their compliance activities, and provides that all-in-one solution. For those of you who haven't signed up to be a player today, don't worry, you get to jump into the action as well. After each domain for Level 1, we will do an audience poll to get your feedback, whether you feel that the organization seeking assessment, the OSA, has adequately provided responses to determine if those associated requirements have been met. Get to play also. We want to hear from you. And throughout this mock assessment, feel free in the chat to post any questions you may have, comments. I asked during the actual mock assessment when the assessor is asking questions or the OSA is providing responses to stay on mute. We don't want to break their flow. The goal is to leave the last 10 minutes of this mock assessment time for you to ask questions, come off mute, share your insights, comments. But before that, you can do it by participating in the polls and then also by doing it in the chat. We have our Level 1 self-assessment. Just give you an overview about the self-assessment. It is federal contract information is what's in scope for the self-assessment. All assets that do not process, store, or transmit federal contract information, they're out of scope for the self-assessment. There are 15 requirements that map to FAR 21, and you also can find those in the CMMC Level 1 self-assessment guide, which are taken from NIST SB 800-171. The organization seeking assessment, they have to perform this self-assessment annually. Once CMMC starts being inserted into solicitations, that solicitation will say whether the contract's going to require a Level 1 self-assessment or Level 2 or Level 3. But for our purposes, let's assume the OSA has the requirement to report their Level 1 self-assessment every year, with understanding that the person reporting it from the organization has to be a senior official. So it's not going to be just Bob or Sally from IT that's taking accountability for self-attesting to the DOD. It's going to be a affirming official, senior level representative. That's good news, because for those of us in IT, we know that a lot of times senior leadership say, okay, IT, handle CMMC, get us compliant, and don't bother me anymore. So they're going to be the ones signing on the dotted line, so that it helps you with getting some funding and support, understanding that CMMC is not just an IT problem. It requires the entire organization to really change the way they do business, have a culture shift to satisfy CMMC. That annual assessment is going to be entered into SPURS. There are no POAMs permitted for Level 1 mock assessment. Also, the self-assessment results per the CMMC program rule have to be retained for 6 years by the OSA, those documents.
When it says that POAMs are not permitted, that doesn't mean that you as the OSA can't use a POAM to track your compliance and whatnot. That what it's saying is you can't submit a POAM as a part of your SPURS score to justify a conditional level 1 or anything like that. That's all that's saying. So just to clarify that little piece there, if anybody was in doubt. And then the 15 security requirements that are listed in FAR, the clarification that came down, and you can actually see this in the DoD level 1 self-assessment guide, is what they're still, if you're following NIST 800-171 Rev 2, the translation between those is they've technically cut out 2 other controls that used to be 17. It still is 17 controls within 800-171 Rev 2, but what they've done with the self-assessment guide is PE 3.10.3, 4, and 5 have been combined with each other to make 2 physical access controls within the DoD self-assessment guide. So if you're following NIST 800-171 R2, just keep that in mind. There's 15 controls aligned to the FAR clause, but there's 17 controls within 800-171 that you have to look at. So depending on which documentation you're using to evaluate your level 1, just bear that in mind, that cross translation.
Yeah, that's very important. And that's what I call kind of like DoD math, where they took the 15 and making it 17. Yeah. But if you look at the updated program rule, that they have fixed that. It is 15 requirements directly mapped to FAR 21. Right. And they also changed the naming convention. Just giving Lance some ground rules for you so you understand how to address your. So now we'll do the introduction. Cody, you can start off by introducing yourself. Are the players who will be representing the organization seeking assessment, and then we also have our assessment team. So we'll go down the list.
My name is Cody Stokes. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity and Cloud Services at Procelis Technology Incorporated. I'm a CCA in waiting on that Tier 3, but currently hold the RP, and I've been working with manufacturers and higher education customers to get them ready to adopt NIST 800-171 requirements for about 2.5 years now. Pass it over to Odie.
Yes, hello, everyone. My name is Odie Gray. I'm president of Diversity Cyber Council. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we provide cybersecurity and technology career readiness programs to residents of underserved communities. Also, intimately familiar with CMMC. I'm an RP and taking my CCP shortly. So really excited about this opportunity for this level 1 mock assessment. And thank you.
Fantastic.
I'm Isaac Obunia by name. I'm a cybersecurity consultant. I'm currently having my 4th year in cybersecurity space. Currently holding the cybersecurity certification ISC Square. And also I'm very, very delighted to be here as a player in this mock assessment. Thank you.
Welcome.
I'm Adeleke Damari Samuel, a former banking professional that transitioned into cybersecurity. So currently working as a assistant at Cybersecurity Consortium, which we focus mainly on researching emerging cybersecurity threats and guiding teams in implementing cybersecurity barriers. Thanks for having me today.
All right, welcome. And yeah, really excited to have both Isaac and Adeleke joining us. We're international. If I'm not mistaken, y'all both are joining from Nigeria. That's really exciting, and I applaud you both for signing up to participate. And CMMC is not a spectator sport, it's a team sport. So you are kind of new to the CMMC space, and that's my goal with this series. You don't have to have CMMC expertise or experience, as long as you're, as a player, willing to read the assessment guides, the scoping guide, just familiarize yourself, come in and play. That's going to be a good way to learn. Like, you may have to hold it down, Cody, for the
I got it.
Yeah, I know you're well equipped, but yeah, the assessment plan. Cody, I'm glad to meet you. Glad you brought us in to do this level 1 self-assessment for your organization. Essentially, I've already introduced you to our assessment team, and we are going to be looking at the 15 CMMC level 1 requirements. It shows how many requirements are per domain. There's 6 domains for level 1. At the end of our assessment, we're going to share our findings, letting you know if you met the requirements or not. and then you can provide any clarification or feedback that you need.
Perfect.
Before we begin, Cody, I'm curious, how much do you know about CMMC and what's your organization's motivation for seeking a level 1 compliance?
So I am the compliance officer for Screws and Stuff LLC, and my background is in ISO, doing manufacturing ISO certifications. So I just kind of got dumped into understanding these new CMMC regulations that we're going to be held to, because 80% of our business is DoD contracting, and we've only had to deal with ISO certifications up to this point. So it's been about a 4-month journey for me to get spun up and understand cybersecurity as a whole, as well as these regulations. So it's pretty new to me from that compliance perspective.
Absolutely. And your team was kind enough to forward over a overview of your company, being a manufacturer of industrial fasteners. And from our initial assessment, we also learned that your team does handle FCI. Right. And it looks like in terms of the contract deliverables that you'll have some documentation and reporting related to the manufacturing process with your business with the federal government. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Just wanted to confirm those details. So based on what you just presented, you wouldn't say that your main bread and butter is cybersecurity to a degree. You said you handle some of the ISO 20s. Okay, just wanted to confirm. So just to provide some clarity, right? The role that we're going to be playing in this level 1 assessment is being a facilitator, aggregator, and I would say, aggregating the information that you provide, but ultimately it's to advise, right? So everything that you tell us, we're going to be able to jot down as it relates to the requirements and provide our feedback on if you meet the requirement or if you need to brush up on your readiness to comply. But ultimately, your answers, your responses, there's ownership there, right? We're not answering for you, so we won't necessarily be liable for the answers that you provide. Is that clear?
Yes, that is clear.
Okay, just want to make alignment on that. So in terms of just kicking off the session, I'll give you a bit of, I would say, the agenda on how we're going to be moving forward. We'll be covering 6 domain areas, and as Derek mentioned, there's 15 requirements in total. I'll be responsible for going over the access control domain area. Then Adelike will be taking over the identification and authentication, as well as media protection. Then we have Isaac that will be going over physical protection. And then Derek will handle system and communication protection, as well as system and information integrity. I know I said a whole lot, so I want to pause to see if you have any questions that come to mind based off what I presented.
Well, I'm gonna be honest with you, Odie. I was actually really counting on our CISO being here because, as you well pointed out, I don't have much cybersecurity experience. I have some supply chain and manufacturing. That's my background, right? I've been working with our CISO to fill out our compliance questionnaires and answers for a lot of these things. So when we get to some of the more technical questions, I don't know how well I'm going to be able to answer those. Unfortunately, they just couldn't make it today. So we'll see. We'll see how far we get. Let's just take it from there.
Absolutely. And that's actually something that is quite common. And through this initial pass, what we can do is, if there's something that you absolutely don't have the background in, we can do our best to identify someone in your team that we can touch base with and then have a one-off workshop and continue that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is we kind of already provided this kind of overview for your organization, Screws and Stuffs. At this point, let's jump into the requirements. Pull that up. I'll share the CMMC proof tool that we'll be using, and we'll jump into the requirements. For time purposes, we're not going to evaluate each assessment objective. We're just going to ask 1 to 3 probing questions to kind of get a feel of if the OSA have met the requirements. But in reality, with doing a real self-assessment, we would address each assessment objective. All right. Yeah. Take it away, Odie.
Absolutely. So what we're presenting here is the access control domain. And the first requirement is for authorized access control around FCI data. Are you familiar and to any degree with FCI data and where that is managed throughout your organization?
Yes, we do have a couple of different areas where we store FCI data. We have a hybrid environment where we store all of our FCI data in our cloud. And then we also have a physical location where we store our data behind, lock and key kind of situation so that unauthorized, people can't just go in there and look at our contracts and stuff. So, but yeah, that's kind of the overview of what we're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Makes sense. So would you say that all authorized users to that data is identified?
Yes, so this is something I've been working with our CISO on, and they were kind enough to provide me kind of the overview of what we have there. So our users and devices are identified with key monikers, unique identifiers, what they say, first initial, last name for users, and then devices have a prefix associated to them. They're put in our AD that way, and that's how their accesses are provisioned. And so, but we don't do any kind of unique identifier for processes beyond their process name. So we don't have any of that.
So when you say unique identity, you say that you said a unique process is for identifying. I apologize, I misheard that.
No, so processes acting on behalf of users, letter B. We don't have anything that identifies those processes specifically or uniquely. They're kind of just a process that happens. We don't really track which ones are being used yet, but we do have our users and devices identified.
Okay, so you have the users and devices identified, but not the process in how they're managed particularly.
Yeah.
Okay, currently not managed. No problem. Okay, so the next requirement we'll be looking at is the transaction and function control for FCI data. So ultimately, we want to ensure that there's a limit of information system access to the types of transactions and functions that authorized users are permitted to execute. And based off your last answer, it seems like there's not a manageable way to identify unique users. So if you could just provide a little bit more clarity on how the transactions and functions are authorized regarding the users, that would be helpful.
Well, our users are uniquely identified, right? Everybody's got first initial, last name as a part of their login information and their Active Directory stuff. That's what I've been told. And by that, they're granted certain permissions in Active Directory, and that those permissions allow certain functions or restrictions on certain functions. I'm not familiar with the breadth and width of those functions. That's more of what our security team does, but that's what they've told me is they're defining all of that and limiting that through Active Directory.
Okay, so do you think it's something like a role-based account feature, or based on their position, they get access to the data?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay, that's
Because I
good.
know that I only have access to certain things and I don't get to see everything, so I'm guessing it's role based. Sure, you could
Okay,
say that.
no problem. Are you familiar with any policies or processes that further attest to them being role-based?
Yes, I believe we have our access control policy that I've had a hand in drafting and doing grammatical correctness and compliance checks on, but that was written by our CISO and it has a lot of stuff in there that I don't fully understand. So I would imagine there's something in there about role-based access given what I know about my access.
No worries, and we'll be sure to follow up with the CISO for confirmation. What I'll say is, given that you have a policy, it's a great indicator that the objective may be met. We're also going to look at your processes, and then more than likely, look for a snapshot within Active Directory to make sure that that requirement is also being met. So I just want to assure you that you're doing a great job and you're giving us a lot of great information about your current maturity as it relates to access control. Going to the oh, go ahead.
I said cool.
Awesome. See, easy,
Yeah.
painless
Yeah,
process.
off to a good start, man. It doesn't have to be painful.
Right, exactly. So we're halfway home on access control. The next one is about external connections to FCI data. So as you can imagine, we want to make sure that no external parties have access to your company's FCI data, and you limit the control of those connections. So do you have any security controls that ensure that is in place?
So from my working with our security team, the way that's been explained to me is that our firewall takes care of all of that. It does all the identification, verification, and controlling of our external system access or external system connections.
Okay. Would you say that the external systems are identified?
Yeah, they told me they have something like a whitelist or whatnot. an access
Okay.
control list on the firewall that allows or disallows connections to the internet and, other things.
Got it. Got it. Having a whitelist is important to ensure that requirement is being met. So that's good to hear. And then you said that there is some verifications of external systems as well. So we would want to look into how that process actually is taking place by the firewall. So we'll probably get with one of your network engineers or the CISO just to get the details about that.
Sure. Yeah, I can do that.
Then last but not least, we have the control of the public information or FCI data. So we want to control information posted or processed on publicly accessible information systems. So we want to make sure that only the necessary users have access to that information. So specifically for this objective, the individuals and authorized to post or process information on publicly accessible systems are identified. Can you speak to that objective?
I mean, a little bit. Our HR personnel handle all the publicly accessible stuff. So, like our website, our LinkedIn, our Instagram, all that. They handle all that, and they have their own internal processes for that. That I don't have any real insight into. That's on my agenda to work with them to figure out what that is.
Okay. Would you say that there may be a policy that broadly prohibits any publishing of FCI data by employees for your organization?
Not that I'm aware of. We don't have anything that explicitly states it. Just, we don't have access to post anything on anything. That's all controlled within HR. They have all that. I don't know anything about it.
Got it. No worries. We'll be sure to follow up with CISO on that as well. But that pretty much concludes the domain I'm responsible for. I'll be passing it to my teammate, Adelike.
And before we jump into that, good job, Ode. Really, yeah, that's how it's done from a mock assessment standpoint. For the level 1 self-assessment that the OSC actually will be doing annually and reporting their results to the DoD, let's say they are bringing in an assessor to do that, the assessor would be more rigorous and they would probably looking for more evidence. However, enter documentation, at least documentation is not required for level 1. So I just wanted to highlight that. But just gives you a good feel of the type of probing questions that assessors would be asking to address these requirements. So I've got to pull up the poll. I guess we put it in the chat for now. It'll take a minute to pull up the poll. But for attendees, what are your thoughts? Do you think, based on the questions, do you think Cody answered this sufficiently to satisfy the requirements for level 1? Keeping in mind, we didn't actually evaluate evidence or look at each assessment objective due to time limits. But what's your feel? Do you think this OSA has a good defensible position in terms of satisfying the access control requirements for level 1? Put in the chat, yes, no, maybe so. How did Cody do?
I voted down myself because I'm seeing everybody say yes, and I appreciate that. I hope it's not everybody being nice, right? Because if you really look at it, this happens all too often in the consulting space. You'll have a meeting with the technical leads and the compliance people, and the compliance people don't understand all the technical pieces, right? And so oftentimes they won't show up, and you'll have one person who has no idea about the technical side trying to answer technical questions, and they'll just kind of do what I did, be like, yeah, they told me we do this, but I have no freaking clue, right? And you will get that from them. So if you try to ask those probing questions of that person, you're just going to frustrate them and maybe even make them upset, and they'll just shut down for the rest of the year. So you have to understand your audience and understand when to ask the probing questions, what kind and whatnot, and who you're talking to.
Yeah, that's a great point, Cody. And that's why initially I asked, do you have experience in cybersecurity and, any idea about CMMC compliance? That's why I kind of like just stay general in terms of the questions to get a direction on, okay, I'll follow up with the CISO on this one. I'll follow up with the CISO on this one. And then, in terms of, the answers that were provided, you did the best to your ability. But me as someone that's providing the assessment, I know, hey, I got to go ahead and find a technical artifact to provide some type of attestation here. I have to dig a little bit deeper when I talk to the CISO to make sure that they have some type of SOP, right? And then show me the policy documentation as it relates to, access control. And you said that you do have a policy on that. So that was great there, in my opinion.
Excellent.
Because that would be something that the compliance person would have control over, is the policy piece. right?
Right.
That'd be something that they would be able to speak to. But if you were to send, if you were to then go, well, do you have any idea what that access control is, or or what it is, or whatever? They're going to be like, I have no clue, right? They're not going to know how to even access that access control list or even get into the firewall, and they may need to not even have the permissions to do so.
Yeah.
Even if you ask them to go, right?
Really
And
good
Mary,
points.
you've had your hand
Yeah.
up for a minute.
So you're up, Adelike, for the next requirements.
So we're moving on to the identification and authentication requirements. So my first question for Cody is, what is your processes for ensuring that only authorized users have access to your systems and data? And how do you initially verify that a new user is identified before granting access to them?
I would say that that's done through our Active Directory. Our security team does all that provisioning and sets all those permissions and all the stuff that they tell me they do.
Okay, so how do you try to employ the principle of least privilege so that you're able to determine what access you're given to each users?
I'm assuming they do that. Yeah. I mean, our access control policy states that users only get permissions for what their job requires of them, and how the security team determines that is on them and their procedures.
Okay, that's interesting. Do you have role-based access control in place already?
I believe we do. Yes. I'm not 100%.
Okay. I think that was okay for the identification. So we're moving on to how do you identify each user is authenticated or verified as prerequisites to system access?
So the way I've been told that works is that's done through the Active Directory permissions, and part of the permission for access to the network or anything is your login. So you have to provide your login information, and that checks in with Active Directory, and that gives you access to the system. That's what they've explained to me on how that.
Okay, that's cool. I think we're moving on to the next requirement, which is the media protection. And what are the processes that you followed to securely delete or destroy media that is no longer needed? And how can you describe the steps taken to sanitize the media before disposing or reusing them?
We don't have any kind of documentation or procedure or policy. Our IT team tells me that we have a company-owned thumb drive or something that has removable media, as they call it. Whenever it's redistributed or needs to get thrown away, they wipe it before it happens. As far as I know, we don't have any logs or procedures written down for that. They just tell me that's how it works.
So you're trying to let us know that there's no documented procedures for your media sanitation?
I don't have anything documenting that, at least nothing within my control. Maybe our IT team manages that and has their own procedures, but they haven't informed me of that yet.
So how do you try to manage the reuse of the informations in the removable devices?
As far as I know, those are procedures that the IT team and the security team manage. I don't have anything in policy or documentation for that. That's going to be something we'd have to ask them. I don't have insight into that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So, Adelike, so we'll conclude with that, the media, and I've already posted the poll, and it seems like the audience think you failed this domain for media protection. Cody, it's a lot of I don't know, or I'm not the person, I'm not the guy or gal. Mm-hmm. So we would need to, as an assessment team, we'll follow up with that stakeholder, those subject matter experts, and dig deeper to make sure we get some answers, because I don't know, it's not going to cut it.
Or I believe so. I believe so definitely doesn't cut it either, right? I think they do that. Doesn't work.
Right, exactly. Okay, so Isaac, I think you're up now. I believe you're handling the physical protection. So if you could come on camera and start asking your probing questions for Cody.
Oh, yeah. Let's keep the fire burning, right?
Let's go.
So we are moving on to the physical protection right now. So explain to me what FCI in scope as far as the physical FCI you have in place, and how do you secure the FCI, making sure that only the authorized user have access to the FCI in the organization?
Perfect. So we have a physical storeroom with locked filing cabinets that's behind a badge read door. We have RFID badges for that system that our HR department works with our badge vendor to manage and issue those badges to the appropriate personnel. We are going to be expanding that RFID badge system to the rest of the company site for all access down the road, but right now it's just in place around our security or our secure file storage area, and that's also where our on-premises server is what they tell me. So all of our files and our server are behind that.
That's very lovely. Okay, so how do you try to manage or maybe control the visitors within the physical space?
So this is more of a broad thing, but any visitors to the factory, to the plant, have to sign in at the front desk and are escorted throughout the plant per OSHA safety regulations and things like that. And if they need to go into, let's say, our badge secured area, then obviously they would need to have a badge secure authorized person to badge them in and go in there with them. So we do have that escort function built in on a larger scale, but for different reasons.
Oh, right. So my last question right now is, so within the physical office where the FCI is being stored, so how do you keep in track or maybe monitor the physical access of the employees, individuals with physical permanent authorization credentials, such like the badges, the keys, the identification card, and the smart card? So what is your
Sure.
tracking system, kind of?
So the badge system that we use maintains logs for 10 days before they get transmuted back to the vendor's cloud. So we do have an on-prem storage for the logs for those badge readers, and then our HR team works with the security vendor to manage those devices and provision the user's badge access.
Oh,
And then
right.
of course that tracks every time they use their badge, they're tracked.
Oh, right. So how do the clean decks policy works?
Well, that's part of our access control policy that I helped write, and I worked with our HR department to do that. The procedures for that is after a person has been put into the job that requires them to get into that file room, they go through the provisioning process with the security vendor. And, this is after we've done all of our, vetting and employee checks and background checks and all of that, just to give them their employee status. And then they get provisioned an RFID badge that gives them access to the room. So that's our access control, or our physical access control policy that governs that procedure.
All right. That sounds pretty comprehensive. We launched the poll. What are your thoughts? It totally satisfy your requirement for adequacy and sufficiency, that they've met the physical security requirements? And vote. And Isaac, Adelike, good job. Ode, right along. You're grilling Cody nice and good. He's holding it down for the OSA. For screws and stuff, they're looking good. I wouldn't say they're 100% there yet, but not bad, especially considering we don't have all of the subject matter experts available. SA. All right, so let's see the poll results. Look at 13 responses, Cody. You got 100%. Good job. You redeemed yourself from the previous domain. All right, way to bounce back.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm up for the next domain, system and communication protection. This is where we're looking to see that screws and stuff have established your internal and external boundaries for your in-scope FCI system. Cody, talk to me how you have established that external internal network boundary. How are you approaching that?
Keeping with the theme here, I don't really know exactly how our IT team does this. They tell me that there's a network topology that they have that tracks, all of the network components and switches and stuff like that. So I have to assume that that's where these things are defined. I just haven't gotten my hands on it to put our documentation together around it.
Okay. All right. Are you aware if you'll have a network diagram or a data flow diagram?
That's what I assume they mean when they say topology. I don't know the difference.
Okay. Understood. So going by the information y'all provided prior to the assessment that you sent us in advance, it does mention that you store digital copies of your FCI in GCC High cloud. That seems promising, and that it does go above and beyond the requirements for storing FCI in a cloud environment. So I'm looking forward to speaking with your network administrator, your CISO, to get more information. But for now, I wouldn't be comfortable marking these as met. I wouldn't be marking these as not at this point.
Yeah, we had to buy the GCC High because of our ITAR requirements around our other manufacturing and ISO certification. So
Okay.
that was why we had to go that route. So it set us up for, this, but we didn't try to do that. It just kind of happened organically.
Okay. All right. So in regards to public access system separation, making sure you have, for example, a DMZ set up from your publicly facing systems are in a DMZ and it's logically separated, whether using a firewall or something like that from your internal network. I take it's safe to say you wouldn't know much about how that's configured.
No, but in my conversations with them when we were prepping for this and starting to get our documentation in order, starting our process to track to these, I asked them about this control, and they did say that we do have a DMZ where our public facing server sits. So that's separate from our internal network. So I marked that in my own documentation as met, even though we don't have the documentation. I don't have it with me right now.
Okay. All right. Tentatively mark that one as met, but again, I am going to follow up with the network admin CISO to get more information, try to get some evidence to where I'm comfortable enough to ultimately say that these are met. All right. So I think for this domain, we don't even need to do a poll. This is an example where the assessment team didn't have access to the correct subject matter expert, whether as a result of schedule conflict, person's out on vacation, who knows? A lot of things can come up during assessment, but this is an example where the assessment team would need to follow up with the correct subject matter expert to gather the needed information, determine if these assessment objectives are met, and ultimately if the requirement is met. All right. Hang on in there, Cody. We're almost done. So we'll go on to the next domain. So let's go into the next domain. So for system and information integrity, we're looking at flaw remediation. Cody, do you have any knowledge about how Screws and Stuff handles patch management or vulnerability management for your in-scope systems?
I don't have any personal knowledge of that. They tell me they have a program for that, but that's within their IT documentation that they haven't provided me yet.
Okay. All right. So I still need to speak with the SMEs. I'm just putting that down for my notes. All right. What about malicious code protection on the endpoints? Are y'all using any type of antivirus, anti-malware solutions? Okay. Talk to me about that.
I know we are using that. We're using Defender.
Okay.
All right. Always pops up on my stuff.
All right. And just to confirm for your organization, you're only allowed to use company issued devices. Is that correct?
Right. We do not have a BYOD policy. I argued against that.
Okay. Based on that information, Defender is endpoint detection and response, pretty comprehensive. Fairly confident of marking those as met. I know it provides antivirus, anti-malware protection. Also, with the updates, you may not have information about the configuration settings, but Windows Defender is going to be real time. So it's going to continuously update those virus definitions. So I'll be comfortable marking that one as met. Let's see. What about system and file scanning? For example, if you're downloading a PDF, do you know if that file is scanned before it opens? I'm sure that there's no viruses.
I believe so, because I remember we had an incident where one of our employees tried to open a PDF off of an email and it blocked them from doing that. So I'm going to say, just based off my anecdotal experience, that yes, it does that. I don't know if it scans on a time limit or whatever those things do, but
Okay. All right. Well, I'll follow up with your system administrator, just get more information, maybe look at the configuration, but it sounds like you're probably going to be in good shape there. At this point, we'll end this version of the self-assessment. The assessment team does have some follow-up, but Odie, I'll turn it back over to you. Just kind of get your overall feedback. What do you feel are next steps for the Screws and Stuff?
Absolutely. Well, Cody, I want to thank you for your time and creating space for us to be able to lead this assessment for your organization. Based on the overall response that you provided, we will have to touch base again with the CISO to request some further documents that attest to the compliance of these requirements. But I think you did a fantastic job at explaining what you know, and that provide us some more direction on where we need to go in terms of getting more answers to attest to these requirements. So I want to thank you for your time. We'll follow up with a report on our feedback and recommendations regarding our analysis. What we'll do overall is be able to, in that analysis work, is really ask more clarifying questions that will lead you closer to compliance once they're answered. So I'll pause there to see if you have any questions for me in terms of next steps.
Well, so like you're not gonna like tell my boss that I didn't know anything, right? Like,
Oh,
like,
no.
how extensive are you gonna tell them? How
Based on your role, you weren't expected to have 100% answers for what we're asking. And I think based on your role, you knew far more than other people in that position. So I think that you have a great awareness on how your organization operates. And don't worry, this is not a mark against you. This is again a collaborative working session so we can get you all closer to compliance.
Great. Please tell them all of that.
Well, wow, that's well done. And for all our players, I really appreciate your efforts. I know y'all put a lot of time into preparation, and for the attendees, that's how it's done. It doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't have to be an I got you exercise and doing really these assessments. It's a collaborative effort. We all have the same goal, protecting the Department of Defense and our national security. So let me open it up for any questions, comments. I know, Mary, I think you had a question early on. I'll give you first opportunity to come off mute and ask any questions you have.
Thank you, Derek. My question was to ask about, since this was just a CMMC level 1, from the questioning, I wanted to understand if this is just more so on a reasoning level, or, you know, like basically taking anything from, let's say, a policy or process document to suffice as an evidence to whatever has been said by the representative Cody.
Yes, a good question, Mary. In terms of level of rigor, when the SA is doing their actual self-assessment to report the results to the DoD annually, they should apply the assessment guide. So they're going to look at the requirement, and then they're also going to evaluate the requirement against each assessment objective. And whoever's performing that assessment, they have the discretion as far as what evidence they're going to need to determine if that requirement is met. Now, for level 1, in terms of when you're doing that self-assessment, submitting the results to the DoD via the SPUR system, the OSA doesn't have to upload any evidence. However, in order to do an adequate self-assessment where it's going to be defensible, whoever's performing that self-assessment should evaluate each assessment objective and determine, using one of the 3 methods available to them, interview, review documentation, or a test, to determine if each assessment objective is met. If the assessment objective is not met, let's say, for example, 3.1.1, there's 6 assessment objectives. If 5 of those assessment objectives are met, but the person performing the assessment decides that the 6th one is not met, that means the entire requirement is not met. So that's how it works. That's the same level of rigor, but the difference is at level 2, the certification assessment, you have evidence. You have to provide evidence for each of the corresponding assessment objectives.
Now, I will add on to that, Derek, is even with level 1, you need to have that evidence available for if the DIBCAC decides they're going to audit your level 1. And you have to hold that evidence for 6 years, and you have to do the hashing and all of the stuff that you would have to do for level 2. You just have 15 controls to worry about as opposed to 110 evidence controls. So just be aware of that, is that even though you're doing it yourself, you still have to do all the same evidence pieces that you would have to do for a level 2 assessment.
Don't want to rubber stamp it and just kind of go through the motions. Remember that authorizing official that from the organization that's self-attesting. So that could have ramifications, both civil, criminal, other ramifications if the DoD finds out that it wasn't done accurately, or that was just blatant fraud. So I want to avoid that. All right.
The golden rule golden rule is make sure you can show that you do what you say. Right. So
I think we should have time for maybe one more question. I see someone has their hand raised. Come off mute. You have a question. We should have enough time for one more question before we.
It's Ola. Thanks, everyone.
Ola. Thank you.
I asked a question about organizations that store most of their data in cloud. I got a good response from Cody, right? Like my organization, most of our data is in cloud. If we have any FTI, aside the physical one, it's going to be in emails and maybe SharePoint. So I was thinking an access control for that, for the external connections part, is if you have a situation where only users that have authenticated against the Microsoft Entra ID in our case, and have company issued registered device that allows connect to the SharePoint and the emails. Is that a sufficient control?
Like my answer in the chat, it depends, right? So if you can download off of that email, then that endpoint becomes in control. If you're using a VDI, then no, that endpoint's out of scope. There's things to consider with that access beyond just the access, and it ultimately comes down to where the data is processed, stored, and transmitted.
Right.
And, CRMA clarifications that have come in around whether or not it can be, but it's not intended to, those bring certain things into scope, like the endpoints and stuff like that. So it really comes down to making sure that who can and what can access that information is strictly limited, not only through access control, but also with logical and physical access restrictions outside of that.
Right. Absolutely. Because CMMC is information centric. It's following that sensitive information, FCI, CUI, wherever it flows, those requirements follow. But we'll close off on that. Again, join me in giving a round of applause to our players. Really commend them. They did an excellent job. They're natural role players. It just made it seem real. And that's the whole goal of this series. Special thanks, shout out to Nigeria, people joining internationally. That really excites me. So I invite you, if you were just an attendee this week, feel free to sign up. We want you to sign up and play. Come join us. You don't have to have experience. You can just join and have less talk, more action. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, CMMC Proof Compliance Acceleration System.
Are you feeling overwhelmed by the complex world of CMMC compliance? You're not alone. Small to mid-sized defense contractors are often swamped by the massive list of requirements, unsure of where to begin, lacking resources, and fearing assessment failure. But there's a solution. CMMC Proof, your compliance acceleration system. Unlike typical GRC tools, CMMC Proof breaks down the process into 5 easy-to-follow phases, guiding you through each step of your compliance journey. With everything you need in one place, from CMMC Level 1 and 2 requirements to evidence tracking and more, you'll never feel lost again. Get CMMC compliant faster and easier than ever before. Our system ensures nothing is missed, saving you time and effort. Built by CMMC certified assessors with decades of experience, CMMC Proof delivers real-world expertise and guidance you can trust. By the time your assessment comes, you won't just be ready, you'll be confident. Visit CMMCproof.com to start your 7-day free trial and accelerate your CMMC compliance today.